The man at the front desk was 84 years old and standing straight. That was the first thing Nathan Cole noticed when he pushed through the lobby doors of the Pinnacle Grand Hotel in Billings, Montana. With Ghost at his left knee and his duffel over his shoulder and the November cold still on his jacket. An old man in a gray army jacket and hearing aids standing at the front desk with a wallet open on the counter, and a patience that had the particular quality of dignity being held in place by a lifetime of practice. The second thing Nathan noticed was the hotel manager behind the desk, a man in his mid-30s in a suit that fit like a promotion he hadn't finished growing into. And the way that man was looking at the old man, not with hostility, which would have been straightforward, but with the specific, bureaucratic coldness of someone who has decided that a policy is a wall and intends to stand behind it and let the wall do the work. "I understand," the manager was saying, in a voice that understood nothing. "But without a valid pre-authorization, the system won't allow me to proceed. There's nothing I can do." The old man nodded once, slowly, the way men nod when they have heard worse things than this and have learned not to spend themselves on the smaller ones. He reached for his wallet. He did not argue. Beside Nathan, Ghost stopped walking and turned his head toward the front desk and went very still. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay until the very end. What happened in that lobby in Billings, Montana, on a November evening, is something the people who were there will not forget, and neither will you. We read every single comment, and we want to know how far this story travels. Gunnery Sergeant Nathan Cole, retired, was 42 years old, and built like a man who had spent 20 years being asked to do difficult things in difficult places, and had said yes each time without making a particular ceremony of it. He was 6 feet, 200 pounds, with a kind of physical presence that announced itself without trying, broad through the shoulders, straight through the back, moving with the contained deliberateness of someone who has long since stopped using energy on anything that doesn't require it. His hair was dark and cropped close at the sides, going silver in a way that had been happening since 35 and that he had neither encouraged nor fought. His eyes were a very pale gray-green, the color of winter light on still water, and they had the quality that people who knew him described, when pressed, as complete, as if whatever they were looking at was being looked at all the way through, with nothing held back from the assessment. There was a scar at the corner of his left eye, a small curved line from a piece of gravel thrown up by a vehicle wheel during a convoy run outside Fallujah in 2008, and it had faded enough over the years that most people didn't notice it until the second conversation. He carried himself with the settled, undemonstrative authority of a man who had commanded people in situations where being wrong about another person was not an abstract error, and who had become, through that education, very good at reading rooms. He had served 19 years with the 1st Marine Division, 3 deployments in total, Fallujah in 2004 and 2008, and a final rotation through Helmand Province in 2011 that had ended with a Silver Star, a separated shoulder that had healed imperfectly, and a retirement he had not fully expected to want, and had found, to his own surprise, that he did. He had spent the 6 years since as a regional logistics contractor, covering a territory that ran from Wyoming to the Canadian border, which meant a great deal of time in trucks on highways and a great deal of nights in hotels, and which suited him well enough because he was a man who traveled without requiring much from the places he stopped in. He was in Billings tonight because his route had required it, and because the Pinnacle Grand was on the company account, and because Ghost needed a real bed and a real floor, which was what traveling with a dog meant when you were trying to do it right. Ghost was a 6-year-old German shepherd with a coat that ran from pale silver fawn at the chest and legs to rich charcoal black along his back and the back of his ears, the kind of coloring that looked, in certain light, like smoke held in the shape of a dog. He weighed 79 pounds. He was leaner through the body than some shepherds, built for speed and duration rather than mass. With long hindquarters and a deep chest, and a way of covering ground that looked unhurried until you measured how much of it he'd covered. Across the bridge of his muzzle, running at a slight angle from the right side of his nose toward his left cheek, was a scar, white against the darker fur, clean and settled, from a wire obstacle during a breech exercise in Helmand Province that had caught him at a dead run, in the dark, at a height his handler had not anticipated. The handler had been Nathan. Nathan had wrapped the muzzle with his field dressing and carried Ghost for 600 meters to the medical station, and had spoken to him the entire way in a low, continuous voice that Ghost had eventually calmed to. And the wound had healed in 3 weeks, and had left the scar, and had not otherwise altered Ghost in any measurable way. Ghost had been through enough with Nathan by that point that a wire across the face in the dark did not register as a defining event. He moved through the world with the particular confidence of an animal that trusts the person beside him absolutely and has not yet found a reason to revise that trust. He tracked the world through his nose first, his ears second, and his pale amber eyes third, and he was wrong about what the data meant almost never. Nathan checked in at the second window. He was 2 minutes behind the old man in the gray army jacket, and he watched the exchange at the first window while the clerk processed his own reservation with the smooth efficiency of a system that was working for the person in front of it, which meant it had been asked to. He took his keycard and his receipt and stood at the edge of the lobby for a moment, because the situation at the first window was not resolved, and Ghost had not moved from his assessment of it. The old man's name, Nathan would learn later, was Harold Gaines. He was 84 years old, a former staff sergeant with the 7th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division, United States Army. Korean War, 1950 to 1952. He had driven 8 hours from his home in Miles City that morning to attend the 3rd Infantry Division reunion in Billings, the final one, as the organizing committee had announced in their letter last spring, because the surviving members were in their 80s and 90s, and the travel had become what it had become. And this was the last time the men who remained would gather in the same room. Harold had his reservation confirmation on his phone, which he had asked his granddaughter to print out because he preferred paper, and which he had presented to the desk. His card pre-authorization had failed because his bank, seeing a hotel charge originating from a city 200 miles from his home address, had flagged it and placed a temporary hold. His bank closed at 5. It was 5:47. He had called them from the car and been placed on a recorded line, and the hold had not yet been lifted. The hotel manager's name was Preston Hale. He was 34 years old, the regional manager for 4 Pinnacle Grand properties in Montana and Wyoming, covering for the Billings general manager who was at a conference in Denver. Preston Hale had been a regional manager for 11 months and had the particular energy of a man who has recently acquired authority and has not yet had it checked. He was not a person of unusual cruelty. He was a person who had decided that his specific position in a specific system entitled him to interpret that system to his advantage, and the advantage of the metrics he was responsible for, and who had made that decision comfortable by describing it to himself as policy adherence. The Pinnacle Grand hotel chain had, for 3 years, operated a widely publicized program called Heroes Welcome, a veteran accommodation benefit that included a discounted room rate, a complimentary upgrade when available, and a pre-authorization waiver for verified active and retired military personnel. The program had its own banner, 5 feet wide, printed in the chain's signature navy and gold, mounted on the wall directly behind the front desk. It had been there since the program launched, It said, in large letters, honoring those who served. Preston Hale was standing in front of it, telling Harold Gaines that without a valid pre-authorization, there was nothing he could do. Nathan Cole crossed the lobby. He did not move quickly. He moved with the kind of pace that makes space in a situation without demanding it, and Ghost matched him step for step, and the sound of 84 pounds of German Shepherd moving across marble floors caused the desk clerk at window 2 to look up, and then the desk clerk at window 1, and then Preston Hale, and then Harold Gaines, who turned his head and looked at the man approaching with the unhurried assessment of someone who has spent a lifetime evaluating who was coming toward them and whether it was going to require something from him. Nathan stopped beside Harold Gaines at the desk. He did not look at Preston Hale immediately. He looked at Harold. "Everything all right, sir?" Nathan asked. Harold Gaines looked at him for a moment, at the close-cropped hair and the bearing and the dog at parade rest at his knee, and something passed across his face that was not relief but was adjacent to it. The particular quality of recognition between people who have been in the same kinds of places, regardless of the branch or the decade. "Card trouble," Harold said. "Bank froze it. My reservation's confirmed. He says he can't override the authorization." Nathan turned to Preston Hale. "Your Heroes Welcome program," Nathan said. "Pre-auth waiver for verified military. That's part of the benefit package." Preston Hale did the thing that small men with temporary authority do when their position is named clearly in front of witnesses. He straightened, and he recalibrated his expression into something that was supposed to read as patient authority, but read, to anyone paying attention, as a man buying time. "The program requires advance registration through the Heroes Welcome portal," Preston said. "Walk-in claims require additional verification steps that I'm not able to process at the desk level." "The program documentation," Nathan said, without raising his voice, says same-day verification is available via D-214 or military ID. What verification has he provided? A pause, the kind that answers the question. Ghost had moved during this exchange. Not toward Preston Hale, nothing aggressive, nothing that could be called threatening. He had taken 3 unhurried steps to his left, and he was sitting now directly in front of the Heroes Welcome banner, facing the desk, with his ears forward and his pale amber eyes moving between Preston Hale and Harold Gaines, with the systematic, patient attention of a dog that has been trained to watch and has found something worth watching. The clerk at window 2 had stopped pretending to type. A woman in a business suit near the elevator bank had turned, her phone halfway to her ear, and not raised it the rest of the way. Nobody spoke for a moment. Preston Hale looked at the dog in front of the banner. Something in his face moved. "I can pull up the portal documentation," Preston said, in a voice that had descended at least 1 register from where it had been 30 seconds earlier. "I'd appreciate that," Nathan said. Nathan Cole paid for Harold Gaines's room. He did this without discussion, simply gave the desk clerk his card and said to charge the room to his account. And when Preston Hale began to say something about the Heroes Welcome claim still being processable pending verification, Nathan looked at him with the particular steadiness of someone who has already made the decision and is simply waiting for the situation to catch up to it, and said, "I'd like the room on my card tonight. We'll sort the program claim in the morning." He said it the way he had given orders in the field. Not loud, not hard, but completely, with no space inside it for an alternate interpretation. Preston Hale sorted it. Harold Gaines turned to Nathan in the lobby, and for a moment simply looked at him the way men look at each other when words are going to be insufficient, and they both know it, and are deciding whether to try anyway. He put his hand out. Nathan shook it. The grip was firm in the way the grips of men who have worked with their hands for decades are firm, not demonstrative, just present. "What branch?" Harold said. "Marines," Nathan said. "First Division." Harold nodded. "Good outfit," he said, in the tone of a man who considers this a meaningful assessment. They had dinner in the hotel restaurant that evening, Harold and Nathan and Ghost, who lay under the table with his head on Harold's foot for most of the meal, which Harold noticed and did not mention and did not stop. Over the course of 90 minutes, Nathan learned, by pieces, who Harold Gaines was. He learned about the 7th Regiment, about the Imjin River in the winter of 1950, about a position Harold's squad had held for 11 hours against a force they were not supposed to survive contact with, and that they had held through a combination of discipline, ammunition, and, Harold said without elaboration, a kind of focused stubbornness that the cold seemed to produce in men when the alternative became clear. He learned that Harold had lost 3 men from his squad that night and had carried the 4th one out on his back over 2 miles of frozen ground and had not spoken about any of it publicly, in any forum, for 40 years. He learned about the Medal of Honor the way he learned most things that mattered, not from a dramatic announcement, but from a small, incidental detail. Harold reached into the breast pocket of his gray army jacket to retrieve his glasses case, and a small card came out with it. The kind of laminated identification card that government agencies produce, and slid face up onto the table between them. Nathan looked at it. He looked at Harold. Harold put his glasses on and picked up the card and returned it to his pocket without comment. Nathan said, "I didn't know." Harold said, "Most people don't. I don't generally lead with it." He picked up his coffee. "Doesn't change what I did or why I did it." Nathan looked across the table at an 84-year-old man who had been refused a hotel room under a banner that claimed to honor his service, who had not argued, who had not invoked the thing in his breast pocket, who had simply stood at the counter with his wallet open and his patience intact, and waited to see what the world intended to do. He felt something that was not quite anger, and not quite grief, and not quite pride. Some compound of all 3 that sat in his chest, without resolving neatly into any one of them. In the morning, Nathan Cole made 3 calls before breakfast. The first was to the Heroes Welcome Program's National Veteran Services line, where he filed a formal complaint documenting the previous evening's events, including the date, time, the name of the manager, the specific benefit provisions cited, and the documentation Harold Gaines had presented. He gave his own name, rank, branch, and contact information. He asked that the complaint be flagged for executive review. The second call was to a veterans advocacy journalist he knew at a paper in Helena who had covered military affairs for 20 years and who picked up in 2 rings and said nothing for a long moment after Nathan finished speaking, and then said, quietly, "Tell me that again." Nathan told him again. The third call was to the Billings County Veterans Service Officer, who was already aware of 3 similar complaints against Pinnacle Grand Properties in the region over the past 18 months, and who had, it turned out, been waiting for a documented incident, with a named complainant willing to go on record. Preston Hale was placed on administrative leave by the Pinnacle Grand Regional Director 11 days after Nathan's complaint was filed. The internal review that followed identified a pattern of Heroes Welcome Program non-compliance across 2 of the 4 properties under Preston Hale's management, including 37 documented instances over 14 months in which the pre-authorization waiver, a standard benefit provision, had been denied to qualifying veterans using a technicality that Preston had introduced into the local check-in protocol without corporate authorization. The hotel chain issued a public statement in December acknowledging the findings, announcing the termination of Preston Hale's employment, and committing to a remediation program that included direct outreach to the 37 veterans identified in the review. The statement included a specific paragraph about Harold Gaines, who had consented to being named, and a photograph of Harold taken at the reunion the morning after the lobby incident, standing with 7 other elderly men in army jackets in front of a hotel conference room. Straight-backed, squinting slightly into the light, alive in a way that photographs of men who have been through what he had been through sometimes are, as if surviving had deposited something permanent in the posture. Harold Gaines had made it to the reunion. That was what Nathan thought about. In the days that followed, more than the complaint or the review or the manager's termination, Harold had driven 8 hours to be in a room one last time with the men who had been beside him at the Imjin River in 1950. And a man in a suit had nearly prevented it with a policy technicality and a cold expression. And the thing that had stopped him was a dog sitting down in front of a banner that already said what the right answer was. Sometimes the lie is not hidden. Sometimes it hangs in plain sight on a lobby wall, 5 feet wide, in navy and gold, announcing a promise that the person standing beneath it has decided not to keep. God has a particular patience with those situations, a patience that occasionally takes the form of a 6-year-old German shepherd sitting down in exactly the right place and looking at exactly the right person with exactly the kind of attention that makes a man aware of what is visible and what is not. Harold Gaines fought at the Imjin River in 1950 when he was 22 years old, in a cold that froze weapons and lungs and the ground underfoot, for something he believed was worth the cost of it. He did not need a hotel room. He did not need to be thanked. He needed the world to honor, in one small practical instance, the promise it had already made him in writing and then chosen to forget. Some promises are worth a phone call, a complaint, a name on a record. Some promises are worth all of those things, and a dog sitting still in front of the banner until the man behind the desk remembered what it said. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that the promises we make to the people who served us are not formalities. They are obligations. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if you've ever witnessed someone stand up for a veteran who was being dismissed, we want to hear that story too. Your words might be what gives someone else the courage to speak. If you believe in accountability, in service, and in the kind of loyalty that shows up quietly in a hotel lobby on a November evening, please subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next story. May God bless you, protect your family, and remind you always that the men who carried the weight this country gave them deserve far more than a banner on a wall. They deserve the promise kept, every time, without exception.